Hello, and welcome to a very special edition of Up Close on METV. Today, we're very pleased to have with us Representative Jim Boyd, who has represented the 71st District and Manatee County for 4 terms. Mr. Boyd has brought integrity, honesty, and a deep commitment for service to this community. However, due to term limits, Mr. Boyd's service as our state representative will end this November. So today, we want to take the opportunity to go behind the scenes, to get to know Mr. Boyd a little more and find out a little about this individual who has made significant contributions to our community, our region, and our state. Mr. Boyd, thank you very much for taking the time to do this.
Charles.
We've been certainly looking forward to doing this. We've had the opportunity to interview and give some legislative updates over your terms in office. But today is a little bit different. We want to kind of do a little biographical thing, tracing your involvement in this community from a very young boy.
Thank you. I look forward to it.
Well, if I may, I'd like to share a little bio that your friend, Judge Gilbert Smith, has written about you, and just so everybody can get a little background about your history. Jim Boyd was born in October 22nd, 1956, in Palmetto, to Hugh and Alice Boyd, and he was very blessed to have an older sister, Dee Dee. And unfortunately and tragically, Jim's father passed away when Jim was very young. However, his mother and he and his sister had a large extended family in Palmetto. And Jim had many mentors and father figures, including his uncle Wilbur, which we'll talk about briefly, and others like Hal Chasey. Jim had a very happy childhood in Palmetto with his many friends and family, and he was involved in the church and the Cub Scout, and that introduced him to Boyd's life. And Jim, according to Gilbert Smith, was always very entrepreneurial and found many ways to make money. And this was a preview of his success as a businessman. Jim was also full of fun and found an ad for a spider monkey in his Boy's Life magazine. And we're going to talk a little bit about the monkey incident in Palmetto a little bit later. But Jim was born into a political family that included his grandfather, Hugh Boyd, who served in the House of Representatives in 1941, and his uncle, Wilbur Boyd, who served in the House from 1958 to 1966, and in the Senate from 66 to 72. And from a very early age, Jim was very curious about politics and served in the legislature as a page. But Jim attended all the public schools and graduated from Palmetto High School in '74. He's a leader in high school and a positive influence on other students, including his classmate, Tom Tryon, who's a Palmetto boy at heart.
He was.
Jim attended Manatee Community College, graduating in 1976, and during college, Jim worked at Manatee Memorial Hospital and later for Manatee County as an EMS, which we'll talk about briefly. He then attended FSU, graduating in '78 with a BA in Business Administration, returning to Bradenton and joining his uncle Wilbert's insurance agency, Boyd Insurance. And Jim was a very natural insurance agent and became very, very successful. And during that time, Jim met Sandy, and they were married and have 2 wonderful children, Austin and Ainsley. Jim campaigned for a seat on the Palmetto City Council, serving from 1989 to 1993, and you served as vice mayor and for a short period of time as the mayor of Palmetto. And all of this was preparing you for the future. Jim continued to be very successful in business and eventually got into real estate. And for a period of time, he managed a successful employee leasing business. Eventually, he bought the insurance agency, and during this entire time in business was a leader in Manatee County, including being involved in the Chamber of Commerce, serving and chairing many committees, including the Legislative Affairs Committee. But in 2010, Representative Bill Calvano was termed out from the Florida House of Representatives, and Jim decided to run for office and was elected to District 68 with 62% of the vote. Very natural person and rose quickly to the legislature, which we're going to talk about, and then into leadership. In 2012, he was opposed again and was re-elected with 56% of the vote. But in 2014 and in 2016, you were re-elected without opposition. So it's a very formidable background, Mr. Boyd, and you know, you have a rich history here in Manatee County. But you know, I would like to go back to those early days as growing up. You know, you and your sister, you know, being raised by a single mom at the time, you had a great family background to help you and everything. What was it like growing up in Palmetto at that time?
Well, first, if I could say thank you, Charles, again for having me. And it's always a treat and a pleasure to be here in your studio talking about things that are important in our community. You're just such a champion for those issues. So thank you and your team for doing this. And also to my good friend, Judge Smith, for such a gracious bio. A couple things in there.
Oh, there's more.
Well, we'll look forward to it. And we will talk about the monkey. That could literally take up the entire show. But growing up in Palmetto, it was a great experience, and I think the judge alluded to that in the bio. I mean, yes, my father passed away when I was very young, and I hated the fact that I grew up without him because I just have heard through the years such wonderful, wonderful things about him. I would have loved to have known him and had him in my life. But that said, you know, I had a dear and loving mother and family kind of unit around us. Palmetto, as you know, is still a small, close-knit community. So, you know, all the neighbors knew what you were doing. All the teachers knew what you were doing. I mean, so there was little chance you could kind of get off path because too many people were watching. So it was a great experience. And, you know, through the church and through, as the judge said, Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts, just different things that I was able to do in that community. You know, I think it was a great foundation for the life, you know, that I've enjoyed since then.
Well, you know, as you were growing up there, you went to public schools, you went on to Palmetto High School, very successful, kind of a leader in your class at the time. But Palmetto was a little different. It was a little quieter town. It wasn't as much growth or development. You know, tell us a little bit about, you know, what you did as a young man, you know, growing up in Palmetto.
Well, you're right. Palmetto was, I don't know, maybe 6,000 people
Really?
then. Maybe somewhere in that range. I don't remember exactly, but you know, I did a lot of things. I wasn't the best athlete in the world, so after, you know, kind of Little League and some of those things, I figured maybe I ought to try to do other things with my time. So I had a variety of different little enterprises that I did. I was a paper boy, you know, and many of the folks that were on my early paper route are still folks in the community I know. I sold strawberries out by the beach. I sold tomatoes with now Commissioner Wisnant at a little stand in Ellington. Back then, we, believe it or not, could put tomatoes out with a little cigar box, and it was an honor system. People would buy the tomatoes and leave money. Once a day or once every other day, we would collect the money, and it was still there. I mean, can you imagine that? Would not even be close to happening, sadly, today. But so I did those things, and just I worked at Smith's department store, which was probably every teenage boy in Palmetto at some point, you know, was either shopped there or worked there. They had a great spot for kids like me that need a little part-time work, and that was a great experience. And you learned a little bit about, you know, retail business and how that happens and how that works. So through all those things, and then being involved in student government at when I got into high school was just you know, great memories and great experiences, and I think great lessons for the future for anybody, and certainly they were for myself.
And obviously, you know, the city of Palmetto has played a big part in your life, and, you know, it's a significant part of your life. And we want to talk about that as you moved into politics. But Judge Smith has asked me to share this one story about you growing up and your entrepreneurial spirit, is that at one point in scouting, and it could have been even a Cub Scout, you found an ad in the back of a Boy's Life magazine for a spider monkey, and you sent away for it. And that monkey came to your house?
It did. Well, actually, it came to the Sarasota airport in a small box. As I said earlier, my mom raising me as my father as a widow, she indulged me in things. I think she thought, well, let's let him do this. That'll, fill a gap or a void. And God bless her, she was so kind about that. So we ordered this monkey, and it came in a box into the Sarasota airport, a very small box sadly for a little animal. Got him to the house. Opened the box, he shot up in the attic, and just that quick. And sadly, that monkey didn't make it. But we got another monkey, and that one did. And we had him for several years, and we had him a nice little cage, little house for him. And then eventually we decided that was too confining, so we let the monkey loose during the day while I was at school and my mom was at work, and he would roam the trees of the neighborhood and
Throughout Palmetto?
Throughout kind of our neighborhood in
I
Palmetto.
see.
Occasionally we get a call from a neighbor. One of our neighbors, Mrs. Miller, called to alert us that the monkey was in her staghorn fern. She wasn't quite as excited about that as I was. But literally, when we came home in the evening, or when my mom would come home from work and I would come home from school after my paper out, that darn monkey would hear us and come back through the trees and end up back at our house. I mean, it was a goofy thing, and he would ride with me on my paper route. People probably thought I was a nut, but he was a cool little guy, and we had a great time with him.
I think it's a great story. I mean, there's not too many people that I know that have a monkey that would come at your beck and call.
Yeah.
But it's a great story, and I think I don't know too many people who have had pet monkeys. So I mean,
Nor do I.
But it's a great story. But at some point, where you finished school and you were a leader in student government in Palmetto, you decided you were going on to Manatee Community College, or was it Manatee Community College?
It was Manatee Junior College,
Yeah,
actually.
Junior
then,
college
yeah.
at that time. And so you went there and for your first 2 years, and then did very, very well, but then went on to FSU to finish your degree. And tell us a little bit about that experience and why you chose FSU.
Well, back to Manatee Junior College, very, very well is kind of a very nice way to put it. I got through, I suppose. But FSU, actually back then, and probably still, today you can do this as well, but when you had a 2-year degree from a community college
Right.
or a junior college, then you could go to one of the state schools. And so it was a choice between University of Florida and Florida State. I grew up, believe it or not, kind of being a Gator fan. My great friend and still good friend today, Alan Langford in Palmetto, his family were Gators, and his dad was one of the guys in the community that just always looked out for me and did things for me, included me in some of their family things. So they would take me to a variety of Gator games. And so I really kind of actually thought after Manatee Junior College I would go to University of Florida. But I went to Tallahassee and looked at it. I just liked the campus. I liked the school. I had an aunt and uncle that lived in Tallahassee. My uncle was involved he was an attorney with the state in different forms of the state government. And I literally decided to go to Florida State as a result of just liking the community and then having family there and, kind of a case of, you needed family around sort of thing. So
It was kind of a natural fit.
it was, but it wasn't real scientific in terms of my decision process, but it ended up being a great school and one I'm very proud to be an alumni of.
And you're still very active with the Alumni Association at FSU. Is that true?
Yeah, I'm a member of the Alumni Association. I'm certainly a booster for the Athletic Association, and actually just was elected to the National Booster Board, which I'm excited about, and that starts in October. Excuse
Excellent.
me. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
But at some point, you had a successful year. You got your degree from FSU, and you came back to Bradenton, where your uncle had a very successul business, an insurance business, and you decided, well, I want to try this. I want to be given this opportunity to get into business. So you segue from a graduate right into the business world.
Yeah, literally like 2 weeks after graduation. My uncle was very, very generous and very gracious in terms of where I wanted to go. He focused at that point on commercial real estate, real estate development. So he did condominiums. He did a number of them on our beaches, some subdivisions in Bradenton, even some projects south of here. And I kind of thought actually through college, he said, if you want to join the company, we'd love to have you. I thought I would do that. And then I don't know, maybe my last year, like at a family dinner or something, he said, I have this little insurance agency. It may be something to look at. his son-in-law at the time, my partner, Pat Osborne, was there. And I started thinking about it, and I thought, well, gosh, this is a pretty good business. Everybody needs insurance. You don't have to start over every year. If you take care of your clients, hopefully you'll have a base that will continue. So I started, my last year, I took some insurance classes at school and learned more about it, and then came back, and 2 weeks after graduation, I was a fresh green insurance. I wasn't even licensed at that point because I had to work toward getting my license. So I joined the agency, and then over time, Pat, my partner, my current partner, and I bought my uncle out, and now full circle, Pat is sadly retiring, which is still hard for me to believe. And my son Austin has joined us about 5 years ago.
Great.
But he's buying into the ownership of the agency, so he'll be my new partner. So it'll be a third generation
Very much so.
operation here very soon.
And it must be noted that your uncle was very active in politics, both in the House and, as I mentioned during that brief bio, was in the Senate for many years. So he had that kind of political insider thing that probably was very, very attractive to you as well.
Yeah, he was, as you said, very engaged, and he was in the House and in the Senate, and it was some of the old, I would call it some of the old guard of Florida, very productive group of legislators. And I always just was fascinated with the stories and the things that they worked on and the things that they did and some of the fun they had along the way as friends became friends. And my uncle's one of his closest friends was Lawton Chiles. And
well, we have a great picture here of Lawton Chiles with Gilbert Smith.
Yeah.
It's a great picture of Governor Chiles.
That was in the governor's mansion. We were up for a meeting of some sort, the judge and I, and got a great picture there. Yeah, I have that hanging on the wall of my office. I love that picture.
That is a terrific picture. But, as you developed your business acumen and your ability within there came to you, an opportunity or, the chance, to do more in your community. And you decided that you would want to run for city council, for Palmetto City Council. The question, first of all, is, why did you want to get involved in politics? And two, what was that initial campaign like? To see your name on campaign signs and things. How was that? On your first foray into politics.
Well, so I hate to use the old cliche, politics maybe are in your blood, but my granddad was in the legislature. My uncle was. And I think one or two of them were briefly on city council. I think my uncle was on city council back in the day as well. So I kind of was always intrigued by it. I was, as I said, in student government in high school, and I just liked that, the ability to try to help people in a platform that allows that. And so I always kind of thought I wanted to run for something to try to, once I could, to sort of give back to the community. And the city council seat came open, and I'd been there forever. So I ran, and I had actually my first, I believe it was, my first run, Gordon Dole, who kind of an extended family member, believe it or not, one of the nicest men in the world. And we'd go to debates, which were very few, but I would call them more of a conversation than a debate.
Right.
And I can remember Mr. Dole saying to the people in the room, well, Jim would make a great councilman, and he almost was promoting me. I was like, well, this is like the best opponent you can have. But he was a wonderful guy. But I won the election and served for one term. Very good lesson in kind of in politics and in local service. Some things, my business was growing. We had a young family, so at the time, after one term, I decided it was probably best to focus on family and business, and so I didn't run again for re-election. But I enjoyed very much the time I spent there.
And and being in that municipal politics too, it's the potholes and traffic and things. And I'm sure you got your earful of people saying, because everything they say is politics is all local.
Yes. I can remember very well Andy Ireland, who was our congressman at the time, wonderful man. After I got elected, I saw him at a function, and he had sent me a nice little congratulatory letter. And I saw him at a function somewhere, and he goes, I just want to tell you, again, congratulations, and you have the hardest job in politics now. And I said, come on, you're a congressman, you deal with, not just national issues, but, international issues, world, the economics, security. I said, how can Palmetto City Council? He said, because you can't leave. You live with your constituents, you go to church with them, you go to Little League, you see them in the restaurants. Boy, was he right. Again, I enjoyed the service, but as you said, fences and barking dogs and potholes and one thing after another. But that's what's important to people in their communities, and that's why they elect folks like me to look out for their needs. So it was a great experience, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. But it's a lot of work if you want to engage.
And I would imagine it is a lot of work. Here you are, a very successful businessman starting your business, a young man starting a family, which I want to spend a few minutes on. Mm-hmm. You're very, very fortunate, and you met this lovely lady here. Mm-hmm. And how long have you been married now? Sure.
We've been married 34 years. Well, 35 in November.
A lot of people have said it's the best thing that ever happened. Again, as a political wife, that's a question that arises too, because one has to be very supportive and do the travel and go to all these events with you and be part of it. So being a political wife is a bit of a handful.
Yeah. So I thought when I got out of city council, I really, state legislature always was kind of what I wanted to get toward one day. And I thought after the city council, I would run for the state legislature. And the timing was, where there was a seat that would have been available. But back then, I was early 30s. My daughter was, I think, 8. My son was 6. Our business was young. And I just decided, Sandy and I, after a lot of thought and prayer, that just wasn't the right time to run. Right. So I put it off, and when you put it off, then other people get elected, and they're friends of yours perhaps, and so waited for quite a period of time, and kids were almost grown, and my son was still 2 years in college. My daughter had just graduated. Our business was in a spot where I could be away a little bit. So that's why in 2010 I decided was the appropriate time to run.
And we're going to come up to this because here you are, the successful businessman. You've done extraordinarily well. You served your community as a city councilman. I think you even were mayor of the city of Palmetto
for 6 weeks.
For 6 weeks?
Yeah.
Well, how was that 6 weeks for the city
awesome.
of Palmetto?
I was mayor of the city of Palmetto. That's a pretty high honor.
And I agree. But there came a point in 2010 where the seat on the legislature, and at that time it was the 68th district, became available because Mr. Galvano, who held that seat, was moving into the Senate. State legislature, representative, it's a different type of campaign. You had to. It was countywide, a larger pool to get your name out to, and you actually had an opponent that you had some candidate forums with.
First one we had right here.
I think we did have one here at METV, but you won that seat handily. And moved into the legislature. And the question being is that as politically savvy as you were and knowledgeable, going in as a freshman into the legislature, it's a complex operation. It's a large operation. Leadership has very much control over people. What was it like as that freshman going into your first term?
Well, that's a great question. It's a little bit like drinking from a fire hose. You go from a small community, and as you said, the city council there, and a smaller group of constituents to the House seat, and everybody's. There's 120 of us, and we're all kind of movers and aggressive and want to get things done and want to be significant in our role up there for our so we'll have impact in our communities. So it takes a little bit of an adjustment. It's not your way, it's the group's way, and it's not just what you want to do, it's what you can collaborate with your colleagues to get done. So I kind of viewed I've been in sales all my life, so in a sense I viewed that as a real help to me, because I viewed, the opportunities there. If I had an idea or an issue that was important to our community, important to Florida, in order for me to make you believe it was important so I could get your vote, I had to sell you on the notion. but I also had to sell leadership on the notion that it was appropriate to pursue. So it's kind of like insurance. I had to,
You have to work all
I've got to
sides
sell
of
the customer, but I've also got to sell the insurance company that, you'd be a good customer. So in a way, it was kind of similar to that. So it was fun to get engaged. It was, we had a great speaker when I started, Dean Cannon, who, was very firm as a leader, which I think was exceptionally good training for me, because you knew the lane that you needed to be in. And in the House with 120 members, it's a little different than the Senate and 40 members. You have to, in the Senate, you can be a little more independent because
so
of the
much.
nature of the group. And in the House, it has to be more collaborative, and you have to build kind of consensus among enough people to get your initiatives done. So I tried to be a good soldier. I tried to do, without violating my principles or beliefs or what I thought was important to our community, I tried to be a good team member, and ultimately that translated into opportunity for me in terms of moving into the leadership roles. But I view that as, it was great for me and a great privilege to be included at that table. But more importantly, to me, it translates to better service for our community, because I have a seat at the table. So when things are important to Manatee and Sarasota County, I've got a seat at that small table, and it gets listened to. And I think we've been able to do things for our communities that otherwise I might not have been able to do.
And I think that's very true. And if I may say so, part of the fact that why you were so successful is that you have a very collaborative nature. You work well and listen well to other people. And the first year, you were entrusted with some very significant projects to work on. One of those was the personal injury insurance, PIP, was it? And that was your first year in the legislature, and it was a significant project. First of all, tell us why that was given to you to work on, and why it was important for you to come up with to craft something for the state.
Well, without getting too far in the weeds on that, and we could talk all day about it, there was a significant problem of fraud and abuse of the personal injury protection, and that is the one coverage, as you know, in Florida by law you have to carry if you own and operate a vehicle, an automobile. So I started learning about the issue. Some of the folks in the insurance commissioner's office and in the CFO's office, and then some of the industry folks started kind of telling me what the numbers were and what it looked like. So I thought this was a great project to work on. And why did I get it? I think maybe because I was, had the insurance background perhaps, but I kind of laughed about it back then. I said, I know why I'm getting this, because if I fail and I get, run out of office or whatever as a result of it, who cares? You haven't got a lot invested in me. It's kind of like let Mikey eat it. That commercial, give it to Mikey, he'll eat it.
I was
Mikey.
Yeah, and that was very true. And as we can see in future subjects that we're going to talk about, you were given so many opportunities and responsibilities that really reflected the trust and the admiration that the leadership had for your abilities to get things done.
Well, I'm not, there's a lot of people up there that get things done, so I'm not patting myself on the back. But I did decide at the outset of my legislative experience, if I'm going to invest the time and the energy to be away from my home, to be away from my family, to be away from my business, and be in Tallahassee working for our constituents, I didn't want to just go up there and occupy a chair. I wanted to take on issues that were meaty. Fast forward, we weren't successful with the personal injury, the PIP reform the first year, but we were able to get it accomplished the second year, and I was very proud of that because it lowered premiums, it reduced fraud enormously, and I think that's good for Florida. So that was first year we didn't make it across the finish line, but the second year we did.
And as a result of that, the people within the legislature looked at Representative Jim Boyd as a kind of a can-do, go-to person. And your responsibilities, your ability to help with leadership activity, it really increased during the other years. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to have had some success, and I did like to take on tough issues. The second year, or second term, which would have been my sophomore kind of term, I took on elections and ethics reform, which was one of the Speaker's, Weatherford's initiatives. Very, very honored to have been asked by him to take that on. we've worked on a good little number of issues that have been I think good things for Florida and good things for our community. So through that, if you're successful and you demonstrate, and lots of people do it, it wasn't just me, but if you demonstrate the ability to, collaborate and be effective and get things done, and believe me, I worked with, and we've had this conversation many times on your show, Charles. I mean, I'm a Republican, but I worked with the Democrats, right. and with elections and ethics reform, I teased my Democratic colleague who was the ranking member on my committee, because she was just praising me on the floor, and I said, if I ever have a strong Democratic opponent, I'm going to play that clip,
play that clip back.
She was so gracious and so kind to me. But that's what this is all about, and that's what I like about Florida, as compared to, sadly, maybe a little more on the national scene. There needs to be more collaboration and bipartisan effort to get things done. Certainly, we have ideological and some philosophical differences, but that doesn't mean we can't get good policy accomplished, and we have in Florida.
And if I may say so, sir, I think what you bring to the table too is that ability to bring people together, and part of that is being able to listen to and reflect on what people are saying, so you can come to kind of a mutual understanding, and that's part of what good bipartisanship is. But if I may, I want to talk a little bit, in 2010 when you came into office, you were put right into the insurance issues. But from then, you went to the House Ethics and Election Subcommittee. You were the chair of that. 2013, you were the Government Operations and Subcommittee Chair, which was a huge responsibility for government operations. 2014 was State Affairs Committee Chair. And as you moved into 14, 16, became the Deputy Majority Leader for the House Legislature. And then in 2014 through 16, you were actually the Majority Whip. First of all, tell us a little bit about what those responsibilities entail, and what you brought to those that position.
So the Deputy Majority Leader and Majority Whip, it's kind of like herding cats, because ours is the prevailing caucus in terms of our numbers. So essentially, you got to be pretty good at math, because you're trying to get the initiatives of the leadership and of the members that want their initiatives passed. You have to have enough votes to pass them, right? So on key issues, or on issues that were important to the body and the caucus, I was the one that was responsible for making sure that all the members in our caucus understood the issue, understood what we were trying to accomplish, and then trying to make sure we had enough votes to get those initiatives accomplished. And that's essentially what the whip did. It was a lot of work. It was a lot of work.
And that had to do with every bill that was before the legislature. You had to be out there in front saying, where are we at? How are we get this done? Who's on board? Who's not on board?
Right.
So it's not just one, it's all.
Yeah, and predominantly it was the the leadership and then key legislators' initiatives, but it's everybody's, everybody that had bills, if they were important to get through, and if they made it through committees, they were important to get through, right? So it was that, but it was fun, but it was a lot of work, because at any moment, the speaker or the chief of staff, or his chief of staff would call and say, where are we on such and such? And, I couldn't guess. I mean, I had to be spot on,
right.
Or, because if it got to the floor, it needed to pass, right? If it was an initiative of one of our members. So it was an exciting time and a very busy time, but I got, I knew the members pretty well, but I got a lot closer to a lot of my colleagues that way, and got to know them and how they thought and how they operated a little bit better as well.
So, Representative Boyd, let me ask you this, because you just mentioned this, about the leadership. Obviously in your position and the responsibilities that you were entrusted with, all come from leadership. How important does the leadership play, as they're developing policy and issues? I mean, you have to work very closely with them. Can you go to the leadership of things, say, oh, by the way, let's consider this. How important is the leadership as they determine courses of action?
It's critical. So everything goes through this in the House. Everything goes through the Speaker's office. So if I have a bill in Bradenton, Florida, that I want to run because of this or that, I have to move it up to the Speaker's office to even see if it's something that he would agree to pursue. So, you have to, so leadership decides bills that go through. Bills just don't happen to get on the calendar by chance. So, but that's the member's responsibility to convince the speaker and his staff that this is a good initiative. There's 3,000 or so bills since I've been in the legislature, and probably before and probably after, 3,000 or so bills filed every year, and 250 to 275, maybe 300 would pass. So that's, bills may be, you can file any bill whether leadership agrees with it or not. The fact that it gets heard in a committee is what matters. So all those bills have to go through, 2 to 3 to sometimes 4 committees before they even get to the floor. So after you get the speaker's approval that the bill can move and they refer it, as they call it, to committees, you kind of get a good sense as a member whether it's got a lot of chance of moving or not. If you get a bill that the speaker's referred to 5 committees, you're probably not going to see that bill on the floor, because it's just, that's an indication that it's probably just not going to get there. But if you've got a bill that gets 2 or 3 committee stops, that's a pretty good path that it's going to make it. So that's just part of the deal. But as the leadership team, all the speakers, and I was fortunate enough to be on in my sophomore year to join the leadership team. Speaker Weatherford made me State Affairs Chair, and which included a seat at the leadership table. We talk about those issues, and he would say, "Well, I've got this stack of bills. What do what do the members think? What do you?" And it was it wasn't just a kind of unilateral decision on his part to bills that would come or go. I mean, ultimately, he had the ultimate say. If he didn't like it, he said, "No, we're not going to pursue that." But it was a great opportunity to not only help craft policy for Florida, but to also be able to initiate, as you said earlier, policy issues that maybe somebody else hadn't, that I could bring to the leadership team and to the table and talk about. And as a result of being on the leadership team, you got a little more kind of airtime, if you will, in terms of the opportunity. So it was, I'm very grateful to Speaker Weatherford for putting me on so early in my tenure up there, and then fortunately I was able to stay involved in leadership until now when I term out. So it was a great experience for me, but it was, as I said earlier, I do believe that translates into more opportunity and more productive type things for our community.
And I would suggest, Representative Boyd, that a great deal of this had to do with your ability to bring things to the table. To not only work well with others, but have results too. To bring the results back to, whatever that legislative platform or policy might be. And a lot had to do with your ability, to bring people together and to make people recognize that everybody has a point of view on this. How best can we work together? And I think that's part of your innate ability, is to bring people together.
Thank you.
And also during this period of time too, if I may, you're working with your constituents as well. You're working with your government constituents. You're working with people. We've had the opportunity on more than one occasion, to do the funding cycle where all the legislators listen to everyone who's asking for their nonprofit or their cause or whatever the case may be. But throughout your tenure, you're working with your constituents, whether it be on traffic issues, whether it be on major issues that affect the community, whether it's in education. So you have your ear to the ground, so to speak, right here in Manatee County, listening to every concern that is brought your way, especially from county government, who's looking to the legislature for their input as well.
Yeah, one thing you should never forget, and I hope the people that follow me and others in the process will remember this: there's not one person outside of myself in Tallahassee that can vote for me. My constituents are in Manatee and Sarasota County. I vote for myself because I live in my district, but no other representative has a vote that can put me in the Florida House. So you have to be in the Florida House to have an impact, and your constituents are the ones that allow you to go there. So I have always tried to remember that every day. Whatever I work on, it's got to be important for our community. I remember Speaker Cannon, when we first got together as a body, and he told us in the chamber, and I remember this vividly, that he says, "Listen, you just got elected by your constituents, in our case 155, 160,000 constituents in my
Right.
legislative district.
Right.
He says, and you represent them, but you're one of 120 members that also represent 19 million then Floridians.
Right.
There's only been 3,000 or so legislators throughout the history of our state
Right.
that have had that privilege. So what's important for Manatee County is important to me, of course, but we also have to remember what we do in Manatee County. If it's a policy issue that becomes law,
Right.
it also affects 19 million Floridians. So that's kind of a responsibility.
So it's a kind of
you
a
have to remember.
balance all the time.
You have to remember that.
You know, you have to remember, this might be wonderful for Manatee County,
Right.
with this funding opportunity or this policy change or anything. But how does that affect the entire state? Because that's the bigger and responsibility is that you're representing the state of Florida.
Right. And then with funding, there's pot of taxpayer money that, everybody up there tries to get some of that back for their communities, and I think we've been pretty successful in that. So those are a little bit different, because everybody's, 120 of us are trying to, to obtain funds that are important for different initiatives in our hometowns. But from the policy perspective, it's us, but it's also 19, 20 million people that whatever we do impacts.
And as you look around, and what you've been involved with the Manatee County, you have always been available and approachable in Manatee County to listen to the concerns of your constituents here, and that's a wide variety of things too. It's port related, it's traffic related, funding cycles of what you can provide and what you can't provide. But you've always you've participated in many chamber conversations, you've done town halls where you've spoken on issues and things. Why is it important for you to have that kind of outreach to your community here?
Well, I may think I know what's going on in the community, and I try to stay pretty engaged, as you said, but the constituents are the ones that you serve. And their ideas and their issues, and in some cases very specific problems. We just had a case this past week in our office where a constituent of ours had a family member in Georgia who sadly had been incarcerated. They thought they had checked all the boxes in Georgia and wanted to move to Florida, back to Florida to be with family. And Florida was, I guess they hadn't checked enough boxes, and Florida was putting up a roadblock for them. So we were able to, interact and intervene with the Department of Corrections and get a couple of other steps that needed to be taken in order for them to be able to make that move. And I hope, knock on wood, that we've accomplished that. So those are, and that's just one issue. There's just a variety of things.
I can imagine, the calls and the interaction that you have with the people throughout. Because you're very results oriented. You want to make sure that whatever you can do, you could do on behalf of your constituents.
Well, we've got a great staff, and I can't take credit. As you know, my legislative aide Albie Kaminsky and our team, they go above and beyond serving our constituents, and I can't do it all myself. And I'm out and about and doing things, so they run the day-to-day operation that really makes a difference for our constituents.
You've been very fortunate to have a great staff throughout the years, And I would just say that Mr. Kaminsky, we've had the opportunity to work with, very knowledgeable, insightful, very can-do type of person, and does you a great service as being your legislative assistant. We're kind of winding down a little bit, and I want to concentrate on something which I think is really something that is significant in your career that you've done. And that's the legislation that you're responsible for that have specifically to do with the opioid epidemic. Recently, you were recognized by the chief judge of this circuit for the legislation that you brought to bear that really helped out the court system, helped out the sheriff. Sheriff Wells has spoken highly of the fact that you've worked so hard to get this legislation passed. And there's two areas that we want to talk about, two areas of legislation. One had to deal with the incarceration for the dealers themselves, and the other one had to do with the fentanyl part of it. So if you can explain what those two areas were, why they're so significant, and why it was important to you to go through this legislation, which again, even though Manatee County is kind of an epicenter for the opioid thing, this is a state problem, this is a national problem, and your legislation is playing a significant role in this.
Thank you. And thanks for bringing that up. I've been able and been fortunate enough to work on some pretty decent issues and big issues in my term in the legislature, as we've talked about. This, by far, has taken just a different level of interest on my part. I mean, it's probably the issue I've been, out of everything I've worked on, literally the one I've been most passionate about. I know 4 years ago or so, when Manatee County was dubbed the epicenter for the heroin and fentanyl deaths, it just really kind of started clicking with me that we just have to do more. And so in collaboration with the Sheriff's Association, with the Attorney General, and some others, we did the first bill 2 years ago, which was what I call the penalty bill for traffickers and dealers. This wasn't directed at addicts who have an illness that needs to be taken care of, and we'll talk about briefly in a minute. But this had to deal with dealers, and if you had 4 grams or more of fentanyl, you're a dealer, you're not a user. And if you opened up a vial with 4 grams of fentanyl in this studio, it would kill all of us. I mean, that's how deadly this drug is. So it just, and police officers, first responders were overdosing, and on it, countless Floridians were impacted by it. There wasn't a person, if you're in a meeting or in a room, there's not a person in the room, either their family, their friends, or somebody close to them wasn't affected by it. So we passed with I think, unanimous support, if I remember right. It was, I'm sure it was 100, I don't know, 120 were there, but maybe 119 to zip the penalty bill, which basically would 4 grams or more of fentanyl, and it ratcheted up minimum mandatory sentencing. And if you were a dealer that was, that someone had overdosed, and you could track back to the dealer that overdose came from that dealer, you could be charged with capital murder charge, felony murder. Literally, just this past week in Tampa, a dealer, a trafficker of fentanyl, was charged with that penalty because someone's overdose was tied back to his dealing. So I couldn't be so sad that had to happen for someone to die for that, but I'm just elated that dealer and other dealers like him will go to jail forever, hopefully, because they've killed somebody as a result of it. Fast forward to this past year when we passed what we call the kind of use and access bill. There's just so many statistics out there about the overuse of opioids, and this was no slam on our medical profession. They're doing everything they can to take good care of their patients, but opioids were just prescribed at fairly large amounts for lots of reasons. So we had a bill that essentially said you get 3 to 7 days of prescription of opioids. If you need more, you can go back to your doctor and get more. And also the doctors then, mandatory in our bill, had to use the prescription drug monitoring program. Only low 20% used it before.
Unbelievable.
And our bill connects it with and puts the funding in place to connect it with other states. So if you're in Alabama and you get an opioid prescription and come across the border to Florida the next day, before there was no way to really check that. So a doctor might say, well, yeah, you need it, we'll give it to you. This way they can interact with other states. So
and that's very important. It's a very important thing because there is that doctor shopping type of thing.
It happens. And then there's some continuing education for medical professionals and some other things. And also in it was the governor's portion and all the sources combined was $65 million of funding for treatment, for some Narcan for first prescribers and a variety of things. So education. So I'm very happy that we were able to do that. And Charles, I had countless emails and phone calls from family members and parents who've suffered losses from this tragic epidemic. So I wish I could tell you this is going to fix the problem. It won't, because there's so much money involved in drug trafficking. but every step we take is a step toward eliminating, the broader problem. And I'm very thankful that we were able to get those two bills and signed into law, because it will make a difference.
And they're two very strong things too, that are very much appreciated by the judicial system as well as by law enforcement as well. And I would suggest to you, Representative Boyd, that the situation now is far, far different than when you were an EMS technician and you were working with the Manatee Memorial. I mean, these are things where people are ODing every day, and it wasn't for the Narcan and for the funding for Narcan, a lot of these people would not be around.
Yeah, and I want to give credit where credit's due. One of the Narcan companies gave us in Manatee County 2 years ago 400 doses donated,
right.
So first responders could have them on their trucks, which I think is significant. But sadly, some people are so addicted to these drugs that it would take more than one Narcan dose to even bring them back. But
unbelievable.
Times have changed, and the problems are a little different. But we will continue to fight. It's a passion of mine that is not going to go away either. So I'm going to, even though I won't be in the legislature, I'm going to continue to try to fight this epidemic any way I can. There's one issue that wasn't totally addressed, and that's education. And we're collaborating with, I talked to the Sheriff Knight in Sarasota, Sheriff Wells here. I've talked to a couple of school board members about maybe even an education curriculum that I've talked to people that are users, and they said, boy, if I'd have known coming out of grade school sadly, coming into middle school, how bad this could be, I would have maybe made different choices. So perhaps there's an education component that we can help implement in our school systems and in our communities, that kids can understand the danger. I had one guy, and I'll leave it at this, I had one gentleman call me, his son came home from college, went to a party. He said, my son did absolutely the wrong thing. He smoked marijuana with two of his friends. Sadly, the marijuana was laced with fentanyl. This was just last year. Two of his friends died. And the boy that the father called me was in a coma, had been in a coma for 8 months when he called me, smoking one joint. Now, I'm not saying that's right, but most people would think, well, that's not so bad, right, to smoke a joint. Yes, it is, because you don't know what's in there and what's happened to it. In this case, it killed two people and put the third person in a coma. So those are the kind of lessons that we need to teach our kids, and we need to have those conversations at the dinner table as families, but we certainly need to have them more broadly in the community and hopefully in schools.
And I would think too, sir, that with your legislation package, both bills that are there, that that's going to contribute to helping solve the problem. As you mentioned, earlier, being able to put drug dealer in jail if a fatality is tracked directly to them it does an immeasurable amount of good, simply because that person is off the street and won't be able to do that to any other people. And I think that's a significant contribution.
Well, I appreciate that, and it's a national epidemic. I was fortunate enough to be able to meet with the Undersecretary of the Secretary of Agriculture when I was in Washington a month or so ago, and we talked about their involvement, and they're very involved from a rural communities point of view across the country, because as you know, this epidemic is hitting rural communities pretty hardly too. So from the President's administration, there's a high level of interest and activity on trying to come up with solutions down to state levels, and even local governments. As you know, our communities here are taking it very seriously. So it's sad that we have to work so hard on such a problem, but we have to work hard on that problem because it's killing people every day. And there's still 12 to 15 deaths a day in Florida as a result of overdoses. So it's something we just can't accept as being the new norm. We have to work towards solutions. And
I would say, you're probably exactly right. This is not going to solve the problem completely, but it's two significant steps that'll make a difference. And small steps lead to bigger changes.
Absolutely.
And sir, so we're kind of winding down here a little bit, and I got a few minutes. There you are leading.
Look how young I look in that picture as compared to today.
Well, that's probably taken 20 some odd years ago.
That was actually Elections and Ethics Committee.
Yep. And you look very dapper. I guess you're there directing everybody around.
Sort of.
And this is another one here where you're looking.
I look even younger.
We're going back in time.
Wow, but that was 4 years ago, Charles.
But you look pretty dapper there as well. I personally don't see any changes. I mean, we can go back to those early pictures before, but I'm not seeing that much of a change. You still look as young as ever.
You're a good storyteller.
But But I want to kind of recap a couple of things, Mr. Boyd, if I may. First of all, you've done some significant things, not only for this community, but for the entire state, for the region, and for the state. And I just want to recap those. The PIP reform thing. That was right out of the gate. As a freshman moving into your sophomore year as a representative, right out of the gate, they gave you this great responsibility, and you rose to not only to the challenge of that, but because of that success, there are even greater things awaiting you. The ethics and election package, that was a huge thing, which was long overdue, which your kind of oversight and problem-solving acumen helped. Charities, we didn't even touch on the charities, but that was another significant thing that you worked on throughout your legislative time. Enterprise Florida, another huge thing. Enterprise Florida was on the cutting room floor for a while there with the governor, but I think cooler heads prevailed, perhaps, and that came through. But you were involved in that. The tax package, which was huge, and of course, what we talked about in the opioid crisis, which I think, sir, is probably the opioid crisis alone is such a significant contribution to this area, this state, for which you should be very, very proud of.
Thank you.
But it's 2018. You have through November as a member of the legislature, but I would think that there are other opportunities, greater opportunities ahead for you. Whenever that may happen, it might be 2 years or 3 years or wherever the case may be. But I see you as being continually involved in this community, in the region, and for a wide variety of things. So kind of give us a recap of where you are looking at now and what you would like to do, perhaps, as you move forward.
Well, thank you. It's been an enormous privilege and honor to serve our community in the Florida House for the past 8 years, and I cherish every moment. Right now, maybe there's things out in the future that, from a political service point of view, that might come up. But candidly, I am thrilled to be back home with some predictability. When you're in the legislature, you're at the speaker's call, and when you're in leadership, that call extends to lots of different things. So I've been home for a longer stretch now since session got out in March than I've been in the past 8 years, believe it or not.
That's great.
It's been awesome. I played a little golf.
That's great.
I've reintroduced myself to my colleagues in our business. I hope I'm not wearing my son out because I'm there every day. But that's been a lot of fun, and I'm really enjoying kind of re-engaging in our community. So, our family and my family have always felt like, to much is given, much is required, and we've been blessed in this community. So I intend to, one way or the other, continue to be engaged and involved in our community, whatever it is, whether it's elected office or not. But we'll see what the future holds. I know there's some good folks coming behind me, and I'm also not the guy that thinks the Florida legislature will come to a screeching halt because I'm not there. So I know we'll have good representation here beyond me. I look forward to supporting those folks and helping them, be as successful as they can, because their success is success for Manatee and Sarasota County, and that's what's important.
And I would suggest, sir, not that I want to call you a senior spokesperson, but that there are people who will, still want your insight, your wisdom, your knowledge of things, how best to move forward. But you've been involved in so many things in the community, and one of those major things that you've been involved with is the Library Foundation. It's something that's very near and dear to your heart. You were responsible, or were there when they brought Stephen King, and then Stephen King and John Grisham. So you have firm roots in community service within Manatee County, and that's really significant. But I don't see you kind of like just riding off into the sunset and saying, I've done this, no more. I see, there's continued input from you as we move forward, whatever that might be.
Well, in all fairness on the library deal, Jane Plitt, I rode her coattails right across the finish line. They got Stephen King and then subsequently
Well,
John Grisham
yeah.
and asked Sandy and I if we would be honorary hosts. I said, are you kidding me? This is like a you can't lose kind of endeavor. So we were thrilled to be part of it, and we were able to help them raise some money
Absolutely.
for some very good causes. But I'll tell you a real quick funny story. And like the last 3 weeks of this session, probably the busiest I've been in 8 years. My phone 24/7 was ringing off the hook because everybody was trying to get their
Sure.
things across the finish line. I was getting texts, I was getting calls. Sandy and I were in Tallahassee most of the last 3 weeks, and she said, you just can't put the phone down. I said, but here's the deal. March 10th, my phone won't ring again. I said, it's going to be nonstop for the next 3 weeks. But March 10th, once I pushed that button the last time and we adjourned Sine Die, the calls will stop. And honest to goodness, pretty much have stopped, which is okay. That's okay. But it's just kind of a funny part of how this system works. But I do intend to be engaged for good things that matter to our community from a local standpoint, and anything I can do to help our friends and neighbors. That's kind of what makes me, energized, and what makes me kind of move every day. So I'm happy to offer what I can, but we've got good people coming behind us that are going to do a great job.
And that's very true. But I don't imagine your phone's ever going to be going dead. I can imagine people saying, well, let's see what Jim Boyd thinks.
Yeah, we'll
or,
see.
Let's find, ask Jim Boyd this or anything. And I'm sure that's going to happen. Representative Boyd, I'm so glad that we had an opportunity to do this, from those early days in Palmetto through your terms on the Palmetto City Council to the great service that you've done this community and this state. We're just so happy to kind of share that with this community because it's a great story. You're so well respected and admired throughout this community, throughout the state, that it's really necessary to try to get as much information out there as possible.
Well, thank you. And Charles, I mean this sincerely. I've done a little bit. You've been a champion for this community for so many years. Your coverage, your leadership, your collaboration with us, and you're so gracious. I mean, good golly, I'd have you interview me and talk to me for anything. But seriously, you have just done so much for our community. We're very grateful, and I'm so pleased, not only for what you do, but to be able to call you my friend.
And deeply appreciated, sir. And thank you again for joining us on this special edition of Up Close. Manatee County has indeed been very, very fortunate to have Mr. Boyd as our representative for the last 8 years. He's worked very hard to make sure that our community has been very well represented. He's understood the needs of this community and has listened to his constituents. He's an individual who takes on the biggest challenges and works hard to solve them. And he does this with honesty, integrity, grace, and character. There's a lot of politicians out there who you read about in the papers or you see on TV. Then there's Jim Boyd, who works diligently with purpose to accomplish the greater goals. And to me, there is no higher praise than to designate Mr. Boyd as a true public servant. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Up Close on METV.